All right, in this video, we are going to discuss child abuse and neglect. And when taken together, these are understood as child maltreatment. So one of the things to think about with children is that they're unique from adults in some very fundamental and important ways, beyond just developmentally and size, obviously, right? Children also don't have driver's licenses, they can't vote, they can't get a job, they don't have any money, and really, in many ways, they have no power. And that's important because with that in mind, what do we do then if a child is unsafe in their home? They're not equipped to just get out the same way that an adult can. They can't just go hop in their car and leave. So what happens if they were born to parents that just don't care for them, don't love them, didn't want them in the first place, or if their parents aren't equipped to care for them the way that any child should be? More so, what happens to children that are simply abandoned, whose parents no longer want them and leave them somewhere, whether that's at the hospital, at the home, or at a fire station, right? Well, hopefully right now your brain is screaming, well, they go to the state, and you are absolutely correct, right? Who's responsible if the parents can no longer be or are not being? You're right, it is 100% the government. Okay, and this is rooted in this concept of parens patriae. Okay, it comes from, or it's Latin, so I know it looks crazy, but I'll say it again. It is parens patriae, right? And parens patriae is this idea that the government has the authority to act on behalf of any person that cannot act on their own behalf. So this might be a child, or this could be somebody with severe cognitive disabilities, or maybe a person that's in a coma, right? This is what gives the government the power to do those things. So let's take a closer look then at what exactly parens patriae entails, or why it even exists, right? Well, at the most fundamental level, the state has a vested interest in the success of children, if nothing else for the mere fact that they are our future, right? So the state is concerned with making sure children are safe and that they grow to be contributing members of society. The state has the power, rooted in a number of Supreme Court cases, as well as in this notion of parens patriae, to intervene in the parent-child relationship, right? We like to think of being the parent-child relationship as relatively isolated from the rest of the world, right? How you raise your kid is how you choose to raise your own child. However, as we all know, that the state can disapprove, and if they do, depending on the severity of circumstances, they certainly can intervene. But what's interesting about this is that when doing so, right, when the court takes a child into their care, they're denying those children a lot of rights that all adults have, right? The children don't get a say in where they go. Sure, we have child advocates to argue on their behalf, but really it comes down to what the adults and the state determine are best for the child. Right? And this is rooted in this what they call this peculiar vulnerability of children, right? Because, as I mentioned, they don't have any of the powers that adults have. They also don't have the same understanding of the world. Their concepts of right and wrong and acceptable and unacceptable behavior are not always at the same level as what adults should be, solely based on their cognitive development. So this idea that the state is the supreme guardian of its people, okay, that's really what we're talking about here when we discuss parens patriae, is that at the end of the day, the government and the state are essentially the parents of the people, okay? And this gives the state the inherent power to act on the child's behalf and determine what they deem to be in the child's best interest. So remember that yes, there's many actors involved, but again, the child's insight into what might be in their best interest is often denied. And as I've already mentioned, right, there's been a number of Supreme Court decisions as well as pieces of legislation that support this idea of parens patriae. Okay, and this is why the state can make mental health decisions for people. Right now, granted, they can only do so if it's deemed necessary and their medical treatment they require must be reasonable, but this is why you can see, or why you can get somebody committed, Okay, this again falls under this idea of parens patriae. So there's some other things that parens patriae empowers the government to do. Try and think of some in your head. Okay, so some of these include things like requiring us to go to school, right? Truancies against the law. Why would that be something that the government could make a law about? Well, because going to school and having children that are educated is in the best interest of this country. Okay, they can also compel the vaccination and medical treatment of children. This is also why we have labor work laws, right, or child labor laws. Right, children can't start working until a certain age. They can't work too many hours or in certain conditions. This also, interestingly, allows state attorney generals to file a lawsuit on the state citizens' behalf. In other words, state attorney generals can go to court representing the state citizen as a group. So no individual person actually files this complaint, but the attorney general can still go on behalf of its citizens. Okay, and this is also importantly for our discussion, is why the state can terminate parental rights. But this is important. This has important consequences for the children. As I've mentioned, right, children don't have much say in this process, but it also means that they are getting bounced around a great deal without their say. Now, granted, that's only in the case of where governmental action is warranted. But this is what allows the government to take kids into their own custody. This is why we have the foster system and why DSS is able to act and do what it does in intervening in family life. So one of the approaches to government action is this idea of utilizing the harm principle. So the harm principle, this sets the threshold for state action. So this is the point at which the state government or the government will intervene. Okay, and I realize that I've been using the state and government interchangeably, so I just want to stop and clarify here that they are the same thing. When I say the state, I mean the governmental state, not like North Carolina state. Okay, I just wanted to clarify. So anyways, the harm principle sets the threshold. So once this point that is deemed by this principle is reached, that's when the government will intervene. Okay, so really where this point is looking at how much harm is occurring. Okay, and if there is what's deemed an excessive amount of harm, then only then can the state intervene. Okay, now it's important to see here that the state can enact, that they can act to, whether that is remove a child from custody, or as I mentioned earlier, to require that somebody is committed to a mental facility, right? So serious harms aren't just physical harms. Sure, that is the most easily identifiable, but this also includes harms to intellectual ability. So if a parent is keeping their child out of school, say they have a 10-year-old that has never been to school, that absolutely the state can and hopefully likely will intervene and take the child out of the home and out of parental custody. Okay, and then also this involves harms caused to a person's emotional well-being. So whether or not the parents are actually laying a hand on the child, and maybe the child's going to school and going to seeing the doctor and doing all of the things that are required to keep their physical person well, perhaps the parents are emotionally or psychologically abusive, in which case that child's certainly experiencing harm and the state has the power to intervene. So one more important concept I want to talk about in this video is the idea of the due process clause. Okay, this is this is the most cited clause from the any amendment in any case that comes in front of the Supreme Court. So this is the 14th Amendment, is what you're seeing on your screen. But this idea, what is highlighted in pink there, that is what is known as the due process clause. Okay, make sure you write that down and know what it is. It is the due process clause. This is the idea that the state cannot deprive any person of life, liberty, or property, okay, without due process of law, which is why that gives us the right to be treated fairly and properly and swiftly by the government. Okay. Now, after this, y'all are going to read an article about a very interesting case and answer some questions about it. So have this idea of what exactly the due process clause says in mind as you proceed to that reading.